Welcome to Toy Polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from Toy Polloi, and today we are taking a look back way beyond the start of Toy Polloi. At the moment I'm celebrating 10 years of running the YouTube channel Toy Polloi, and I've been fixing toys a lot longer than that, but even before I started fixing toys I used to make things. So today we are going to go way back into my childhood when I was sort of 10, 11, 12, something like that, and I'm going to show you some of the things I made then, and it might give you an idea of how I ended up doing the thing that I do now, which is fixing toys, because not only did I fix toys at that time and sort of make things for them, I also made my own toys. When I'd watch a TV show or a movie or something like that and there weren't toys available for it, I would sit down and have a go at making my own, and luckily my mum actually saved a good chunk of those things, and that's what's in these boxes here. So today, as a special treat, I'm going to show you some of those creations that were made back in the early 80s by a very young Toy Polloi. Right, well, we are going to start with this box. As you can see on the front it says handmade by David. These are lots of things that I made as a child, and actually looking at them again recently, I have no idea how I constructed them or how I put them together. They are really pretty complicated things, considering I was probably 10 to 12 years old, but they're really fascinating and sort of really do show sort of how I've ended up doing the sort of thing that I do now and making and creating things, which is why I thought it would just be fun to have a look through them. All of the things in this box are made out of felt, and they are generally sort of TV show or cartoon related. So let me pick out a few of my favourites and I'll tell you all about them. Okay, so we are going to start with Doozers from Fraggle Rock. I absolutely love the Jim Henson's Fraggle Rock TV show. I'd sit down and watch it every week and record different bits of it off the telly, and the Doozers were by far my favourite of those creatures that you saw in it. But there were only a few toys available and I didn't have a huge amount of pocket money, so the next best thing for me was to make them. And my mum had a whole sort of selection of different coloured felts, and you can see that I managed to pick out a green felt, which is pretty Doozer coloured, and I would have sat down and made these. To be honest, looking at them now, I have no real idea how I made them. They are incredibly complicated, and as a 10 to 12 year old child, I'm just amazed at actually sort of what details went into it. We've even got little sort of spades and spanners and stuff all over them. Everything is sort of fairly neatly sewn. I'm not going to say it's the most amazing sewing, but it's pretty well made. We've got little bits of detail that have been glued on. I do remember that these had little hats and helmets that I'd made, but those seem to have been lost to time. And as you can see, there's a few different sizes of them. We've got these sort of medium-sized ones. There's a couple that are much smaller, which must have been even harder to make. I don't think I would be able to make those now, just because, yeah, sewing something that small is going to be really quite hard work. But the one that really amazes me out of all of these is this incredibly tiny one here, which measures, it's about 25 millimeters tall. It has little arms, it's got little details on it. The arms and legs look like they've been glued together, but the body has been sewn. There's a little bit of thread for his little antennas. I have no idea how I made that, but I'd obviously spent a lot of time sitting down and creating these, and that was all because I really loved the Fraggle Rock TV show. It's amazing that these have survived. You can see there's a little bit of sort of damage and whatnot from the glue going off, but these are now 35 years old, so it's amazing they still survive. Another thing that I was really into in the 80s was the movie Ghostbusters, and of course there weren't that many toys available. In fact, I don't think there were any toys available for it. So what did I do? Of course I ended up making my own. So you can see here a couple of the toys that I made. I made a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man out of pom-poms and a couple of different versions of Slimer. In fact, I have a photo of these exact toys with a Lego Ecto 1 that I made, and a modified version of an A-Team figure, which I will show you in a minute. But let's take a closer look at these pom-pom creations. So the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, it actually is pretty complicated. I'm not quite sure how I would have gone about constructing this as a child, because there's lots of different pom-poms that all appear to have been sort of tied together. Then we've got some felt detail for his little neckerchief there, and a hat again made out of some felt and some fabric. It's really quite a complicated construction, and I think if I tried to make this today I would have great trouble doing it. But it does actually look like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. And then we have some simpler things here for Slimer. Again, this is just a pom-pom. This one has some details for his face, and this little one here has some details for his face, and I've actually added some arms to it. But the thing I'm most pleased about still having is actually this little jacket here. Because there were no toys available, I sort of did the next best thing, which was to take my A-Team figure. I only had one A-Team figure, which happened to be Murdoch, and because he'd got beige trousers, I thought that looked a little bit like a Ghostbusters suit. So I used this fabric to make a little jacket that sits over the top of the Murdoch figure. And then I think I made a backpack out of some Lego and a little sort of wand out of some Lego as well. And this Murdoch figure became my Venkman, and he was the one that would then fight the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and Slimer. So it's quite amazing that this little jacket has survived. It's the sort of thing I would have expected just to be thrown away, because it doesn't really do anything without the figure. But for some reason my mum kept this, and I'm really pleased she did. So we've now got a little selection of my Ghostbusters handmade toys. Cartoons were a big part of my life back in the 80s, and there were many that I used to watch when I got home from school, and one of those would have been the Inspector Gadget cartoon. But it wasn't Inspector Gadget that I really liked, it was his dog Brains. So again, it must have been one sort of rainy afternoon or something like that. I sat down and I constructed this out of some felt. So this is my childhood version of Brains the dog. It's just a couple of bits of felt sewn together. It looks like he's probably stuffed with wool or something like that, and then a few bits of details added by gluing other bits of felt onto him. I do remember at the time I also made him a little headset, which I think would have been made out of a paperclip. That seems to have been lost sort of over the years, but we still have this little Brains the dog, and I think he's looking rather cool. And yeah, I can certainly see why I spent so much time making him, because there were no toys available, or none that I knew of. I had my very own version that, as I sat watching the cartoon, I could sort of interact with and play along and sort of recreate what was going on screen. Another TV show at the time that caught my eye was The Trapdoor. It was a stop motion sort of claymation animation series which always had really fun stories, and the dungeon that they inhabited was filled with these sort of weird, strange little creatures, and the ideal thing for me to make. So again, out of felt, I spent quite a lot of time creating these little characters. These are not quite as complicated as the other ones I've shown you. In fact, these are all sort of fairly flat and just sort of sewn around the edge, but they actually look pretty good. So here we've got a little Boney, which is a skull. So this is just two bits of felt sewn together. I've sewn on some details for his sort of eyes and nose, and then it looks like I've gone around it in a pen or something just to make it stand out. Then obviously we have Burke, the sort of main character. This again is just two bits of felt, but with padding inside, and I've sewn along sort of key areas to give it some detail. A little bit of a pen for his mouth there, and some glued on eyes. And then we have a selection of other little sort of critters and creatures that would have lived in the dungeon. So there's some sort of pink monster there. We've got a spider with little bits of felt for his legs. He's only got 6 legs. Maybe that's how he actually sort of looked in the show. I can't remember, but he looks pretty cool. And then a couple of little sort of, let's call them sort of cave dwelling creatures, so things that would have sat on the floor. And these are really simple. These are just 2 bits of felt stuck together and a bit of a pen to add some eyes. And that one's a blob with a little bit of a pen on it for the eyes. But as you can see, when you've got a few of them, as a child I would have loved this, because I could have made a little scene up with them and just sort of played along as I watched the show. I have absolutely no recollection of making these at all, but I remember watching the show, and it must have had that much of an impact on me that I wanted to have some toys to play along with it. And this is what I've created. Now recently there is a company here in the UK that's actually started making some toys from this show, which would have been great as a child, but you know, as they didn't have them then, this is what I ended up doing. Now the last thing I'm going to show you from this box is probably my favourite of all the things that have survived. I was really into the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe cartoon, and I only had 2 figures from that show. I had Man-E-Faces and Trapjaw, both of which that had been found at jumble sales. But the character I really liked and wanted was this guy, which was a Ram Man, and there was no way I was going to be able to get him. I just couldn't afford him. I don't think I'd ever seen him in the shop, so the next best thing to do for me was to make that thing out of felt. And as I say, this is probably my favourite. So what I've done since I've found it is I've actually cased it up to make it look like a sort of original vintage figure. So this is the Ram Man that I made as a child. Again, it's constructed out of felt and sort of various bits and bobs. Some bits are sewn together, some bits are glued together. It doesn't look hugely like Ram Man. It's got a very strange little face, but this was my childhood interpretation of that character, and he looks absolutely fantastic. And that is the reason why I've boxed him up, because this is the most precious one of all of these things. I just don't want him to get sort of damaged or dirty or dusty, so I thought by encasing him in his own little sort of custom Masters of the Universe case, I can display him with the rest of my figures. There's just something about this sort of figure that he just looks fantastic. I can't remember making him at all. There's nothing sort of in my mind of how I made him or sort of when I made him. It is just a little peek into my sort of childhood toy making and the sort of cartoons and TV shows that I love. So this is my favourite of the felt creations. There are a few more things in here I'm not going to bother showing you today, but I think this one is the peak of what I made as a child there out of felt. It wasn't only felt that I used to make things out of. I was really into the Fimo modelling clay, which was a clay that you could sort of buy in multiple colours, shape and then bake in the oven. And once you baked it in the oven, it turned rock solid. So here's a small selection of some of the things that I made using Fimo. I was obviously clearly into the Flintstones at the time, so I've made my own version of Fred Flintstone. It's fairly naive in its construction, but I have to say it does actually look like Fred Flintstone. His nose is a little bit strange. It's a bit bent off to one side. Maybe that happened in the baking of it, because sometimes when you bake these things in the oven they fell over and would end up a little bit distorted. But as a little toy made by a child, actually that doesn't look too bad at all. I'm quite impressed with my own work there, and for some reason I've made Barney Rubble into a weightlifter, so we have a slightly better looking Barney Rubble. I think this actually looks better than Fred Flintstone. He's got all the details there. He's got a little belt on, and his face does really look like Barney Rubble. I put an awful lot of detail on there. I'm wondering if I actually sort of painted part of that face on. It looks like I possibly did. There's certainly some paint and details on his belt there. But yeah, we have a little version of Barney Rubble with a cocktail stick being used to make the weights there, and also a separate little weight there that he obviously can't hold, but just to go with the scene. Now if you watch this channel you'll know that I'm big into Star Wars, and I'm also big into Transformers, so it's hardly surprising that I ended up making some of those things out of Fimo as well. This is a little A-Wing. I had a book at the time which had a few pictures of some of the Star Wars vehicles, and I remember this picture of an A-Wing. I think it was sort of angled like that. So this is my version of that A-Wing. It's made out of Fimo. It looks like it's just made out of some grey Fimo, which I have then painted afterwards, and the details in the paint are pretty impressive. I don't think I would be able to get such tiny little thin lines as I have managed to paint here. Maybe I ended up doing that with a pen of some kind, because yeah, it really is very detailed and very fine work. But I've only done the top of it. The bottom of the vehicle doesn't have any detail on it, so it just has to sort of lie flat on the floor there. Then we have a slightly more naive version of an ATST, but it's still quite impressive. I have no idea how I managed to get this to stand up. Maybe there's some wire or something inside it. I can see the bits of wire used for the guns there, but it's a pretty sort of nifty looking toy. Oh, I can see there's a little hole in the middle. Maybe that's how I ended up getting it to stand up in the oven, because if you put something like that in the oven it would just sort of melt and collapse as you baked it. So yeah, that's my childhood version of an ATST. I always wanted the toy of the ATST and I never got it. In fact, it was one of the first things I bought when I started collecting in my sort of early 20s. So this would have been the only version I had as a child. I think it's pretty cool. Then, as I say, Transformers were a big part of my childhood, so I've got some very tiny versions of a couple of Transformers. That one I believe to be Run Amok, which was one of the battle chargers, which is actually a favourite of mine today, so that's my little version of Run Amok. And I have a feeling that that is supposed to be Ratchet. It certainly looks like Ratchet. That is all made out of Fimo, so all the details are little bits of Fimo stuck on. That one looks to me like I've painted it and then maybe drawn the details on with a pen. But these are incredibly tiny, and I would have great trouble making something like that today. It's such a fiddly little thing to make, but yeah, pretty cool to still have these, and I'm very pleased that I've still got them and I'm able to display them with the rest of my Transformers. Now, another thing that I was really big into in the 80s was Jean-Michel Jarre. He had a concert called Houston Leon, which I watched on the telly, and I think I had it on cassette, and I listened to it over and over again. And the imagery with that had really struck with me. I liked the music, I liked the imagery and the lasers and all of the effects that he did. So I spent a lot of time making this. All the characters and the musical equipment is made out of Fimo. The background is made out of old cornflake boxes and paper with hand-drawn elements on it. And this must have taken me absolutely ages to make, because there's lots of details going on. If I show you some of the things close up, you'll see exactly what I mean. If I bring you one of the Jean-Michel Jarre, so the figure itself is fairly basic. It's just a little character there, a little bit of detailing for his shirt, and he's got quite a nice jacket on there with little tails hanging down. But the keyboard, I have made individual keys, so it does actually look like a keyboard. It's got the right amount of keys as well, and it's designed so that it fits perfectly with this little figure. He stands and his hands sit on the keys. Then we have other ones as well. We've got him playing a sort of guitar type keyboard, so he's holding the keyboard sort of wrapped around his neck there with all of the bands. And again, I've put in all of the keys on the keyboard. I think if we go here, we've got the laser harp, which was a big part of his show, which was a sort of musical instrument he played by putting his hands over the lasers and cutting the beam. So there's a special version of Jean-Michel Jarre with silver gloves to reflect the lasers and make the sounds. We have also his sort of round or sort of semicircular keyboard, which again was a big part of the concert, which had light up keys. So I've made this out of what looks like black Fimo and then painted on the keys at the top and painted a couple of the keys lit up. So when this character stands next to it, his hands are actually pressing the keys and lighting it up. There is so much work involved in this. It must have taken me weeks to make, and each time I would probably have to ask my mum to put the oven on to specially bake some of the Fimo for me. But as you can see, I ended up making this little diorama, and this is clearly what has influenced me today of how I collect my toys and what I do with my toys, just sort of making stuff and playing with it. There is one little odd character in this which has taken me a little while to sort of remember who it is. Next to the saxophone player, we have this guy here, which doesn't fit in with the rest of them. It's the same style and the same sort of way I have made it. But this is actually Falco, the Austrian pop star, again from 1986-ish. I really liked Rock Me Amadeus, so this is a little version of Falco that I made. So he's sort of standing in the background with Jean-Michel Jarre at the moment. But as you can see, a lot of work went into making this, and my mum obviously liked it enough that she's just kept it all of these years, and I'm really glad she's kept it, because I am now going to keep this as well, because it sort of gives you an indication of how I end up being the sort of person I am now, and why I like playing with toys and why I like fixing toys, and I find that quite fascinating.
Polloi.
So there you go, there's a little trip into the past, and hopefully an indication of how and why Toy Polloi started, because a lot of people do ask me, you know, why did Toy Polloi start? And I've covered that many times in various interviews and Q&As, but I guess Toy Polloi actually started a lot longer than 10 years ago. It started in my childhood when I sort of got into making things, and if a TV show or a movie didn't have toys, I would make my own version of it, and I think that has just carried on into what I do today, except now I fix toys, and you know, if a toy isn't there, I'll make my own version of it or modify it to make it how I wanted it to be. But this is clearly the start of my process and the reason that I do what I do today. So hopefully this video, looking back way into the past, has been of interest to you. Obviously Toy Polloi is celebrating 10 years, which is a massive milestone. I do need to say thanks to everybody who's taken time to watch my videos and comment on them over those 10 years. Hopefully Toy Polloi will carry on for many more years to come. I certainly have no plans in stopping, so keep watching, keep subscribing, keep clicking the like buttons, keep doing everything you're doing, and hopefully keep enjoying the toys, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching Toy Polloi. Subscribe for more great videos.